The real problem here is lack of systems. The real problem is unclear job roles. The real problem is your lack of leadership training as an architectural practice owner.
Well-run, powerful teams, what you can start to get accomplished is extraordinary.
The working hard is not the key critical piece in success. Hello, Architect Nation, and welcome back. This is the right place for you if you run an architectural engineering or interior design practice, or even a landscape architecture practice. On today's episode of the Business of Architecture show, you'll discover the quantum leap growth move that can compress 10 to 20 years of firm building into as little as 12 to 24 months without all those 80-hour weeks or hiring chaos. How you can buy a larger practice with little to no money down using the firm's own cash flow, plus which niches, K through 12, education, healthcare, civic, can act like stabilizers in a storm, as well as the desert that traps most small firms of 5 to 20 people and the simple systems that let you step over it so you can become the creative director of your own time again. And now a word from today's sponsor.
BIM can be important for your next project, but it's not the only thing you need for your next project. That's why it's important that 95% of manufacturers who offer free BIM files on ARCAT also offer another type of data your project needs. That means 95% of the products with BIM also have CAD files and are in a specification, in a patented spec wizard, and or have product information to help you make the right selection. So stop going to a site with just BIM and go to arcat.com to get everything you need for your next project for free and without registering. That's ARCAT, ARCAT.com. A while ago, we began to hear reports of a company that was helping some of our clients build remote teams. We looked into it more closely and discovered the company World Teams that was helping small architectural practitioners build remote teams that were both capable and qualified. We were intrigued by another business that are addressing one of the critical pain points for small architectural practices, which is the ability to grow and shrink a team effectively, to be able to handle higher workflow without having to staff up significantly, and also being very sensitive about labor cost. World Teams is built to address these issues. World Teams is a small but mighty company that helps architectural practices build high-performing remote teams quickly and efficiently, saving you the headache of sorting resumes and interviewing underqualified candidates. World Teams operates in your time zone and prioritizes near-native English speakers, ensuring clear and efficient communication with your remote team members. They have flexible contracts so you can adjust your team size as your needs evolve. Additionally, you're connected directly with your skilled professionals, which fosters trust and collaboration, and World Teams helps you reduce your operating cost without compromising the quality that's so important to a practice. To download a free guide for building a remote team for a small architectural practice, go to businessofarchitecture.com/World Teams. That's one word, businessofarchitecture.com/World Teams.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Architecture. I am joined here with co-founder of the Business of Architecture, Mr. Enoch Sears. Enoch, how are you?
Doing well today, Ryan. Thank you.
Excellent. So we're here in Manhattan in this beautiful podcast studio. And I think today we're going to talk about an unconventional way to grow your architecture firm.
That sounds scary. Growing a firm.
It is a little bit
Ryan?
scary.
Why would I want to grow a firm?
And it's interesting because yesterday we had a great lunch with our good friend Herb Cannon, and Herb's obviously involved in the valuation of architecture firms and facilitates the buying and selling of architecture companies, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it brought up a lot of interesting ideas of different ways to grow your architecture business. And one thing that we've noticed in a lot of work that we've done with practices over the year is almost a reluctance to grow your firm. And that actually a lot of firm owners don't want to be involved in growing an organization. I might even suggest as well that a lot of people, when they start their own architecture firm, particularly solopreneurs, are not interested in growth. They actually want to have a business, which is a lifestyle business, where they get to have complete control over their time, their life, their schedule. There's a vision of the kind of beautiful work that they get to do, and other people and a larger organization. No, that's not that's not what we're interested in.
Yeah, so let's paint a picture of that, right? Because both you and I have explored that dream. We've both been in the driver's seat of architectural practices pursuing something like that. And if I was to paint a picture of that, what I would say is that many small architectural practice owners, they love architecture, which first of all is amazing and commendable, that they actually love what they do. But what they might not love are all the support things, the administrative tasks that need to happen to be able to do the architecture. So they may feel, and I know this because I felt this myself, a feeling of flow when you're in that design realm, when you're sketching out a new solution or you're mapping out a new space and you're figuring out what this project's going to look like. It's very, very rewarding. And so typically a lot of people who owns and run small practices, what they really want ideally is they want to spend a large majority of their time. So let's just paint a picture of the ideal realm here, right? It would be on creative work.
Yeah, creative freedom.
So it'd be typically drawing out plans in the programming phase of things. It would be coming up with creative solutions and ideas for solving architectural problems. It would be interfacing with enjoyable clients who appreciate design. It would be getting praise or positive feedback from clients that they're so glad that this thing happened or that it turned out this way. So there's this beautiful synergy between the architect and the client. It would be flexibility in terms of work schedule. So maybe being able to work less than a 40-hour work week to be a parent. Maybe it would be being able to take off at the drop of a hat to be able to go to a kid's baseball game. It might be being able to take a week or two off to go on vacation, unplug from the office and not have to be so tied to deadlines and ongoing projects. It would be getting a certain amount of financial reward, at least to make ends meet, not having to struggle for collections or fighting with clients about money, but at the same time, not necessarily needing to get wealthy off of architecture or needing to make a lot of money.
Yeah, as long as it was fulfilling and there was, that word work-life balance was established. There was a level of freedom in your schedule, doing all the things that you've just described there, and that's a fulfilling existence.
Yeah, and challenging work, right? So perhaps work that continues to push you a little bit. Maybe
intellectually.
Maybe you're not doing the same thing over and over again, right? There's always something new. There's something interesting that's pulling you forward into new ways of growing as an architect and as a professional. So let's say that's the dream.
That sounds good.
Yeah, that's the dream.
I'm up for that.
Yeah, sounds amazing, right? So this is whether you've stated this or not as an architect, and I'm speaking to our audience, it's likely that if you run a small architectural practice, that's what you have in your mind as the ideal outcome of what you would really like to achieve with a practice. And the first thing we want to say here is that there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, that's a beautiful dream. It is aligned with what we have discovered is probably the way that you're built in the world, meaning you should be spending more time on the creative pursuits. You should be being able to bring your architectural expertise and creative genius to the world without having to worry about all the admin and all the things that go along with that as well. And the reality of the situation is that when practitioners begin to do this, they begin to understand that, all that administrative stuff, all that support stuff, there's a whole lot more of that than they actually thought, especially when it comes to pipeline and to acquiring projects and the type of projects you get, writing proposals, how you structure those proposals, how you make a case for the value that you provide as an architect. And the list goes on and on and on. Not to mention if you're going to hire people or support staff and delegating and following up with them and making sure they do things correctly, making sure they show up on time, dealing with any of the baggage or emotional baggage they may bring from their home life into their work with you, trying to find them in the first place because you may be in a place where it's difficult to find architectural staff. So it's not uncommon. So we do want to address, as we talk about this unconventional way to grow a firm, we do want to address the reluctance of the culture, the anti-growth culture within the architecture industry. And I'll illustrate this with a short story, a real life story from an architect who I met at an architectural conference for residential architects, and it's not an uncommon conversation. We were having a cocktail mixer where I was probably chewing on some salami and maybe a couple of, wheat crackers with a little bit of wine. And as I'm talking to this professional, he's in Northern California, and he mentioned quite proudly that he doesn't have any employees, and he's very happy about that. And I said, well, that's great. Tell me more about that. So why have you structured your practice that way? Because he also had a number of complaints that he was talking about. He talked about how right now work is scarce. Sometimes he goes periods of time worried or maybe not having work, which can be frustrating. Sometimes he gets projects that don't meet his aspirations and aren't really the kind of projects he would like to get. So there were a number of things that weren't working in his world and in his practice. And as we were talking, and I asked him about why he was so committed to being a sole practitioner, he said, well, he's had up to 4 to 5 team members in the past, and his job turned into being a babysitter. He dealt with people issues all the time, and he said it was a complete nightmare, right? And so ultimately, after growing to that level, he then let go of those people, and I want to call it, took his practice down to the sole practitioner model, right? Which is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Like that's so we do want to make the point that that is a very, very viable model. It can be very difficult to pull off. You need to have a lot of particular skill sets and perhaps even some very good systems and outsourcing to be able to pull that off in a way that you're going to feel really great every single day about what you do, right? And there's a whole nother world of growing, which actually doesn't need to look like what this firm owner had experienced. People issues, difficulty hiring. You don't want to grow because you need to feed the beast now. You have payroll to deal with. And so all these things contribute to the anti-growth culture with small firms. And what we would suggest is that it's not the growth itself that is inherently dangerous, risky, or bad, or unsavory. It's actually the lack of knowledge about how to run a business, about growth and scale that architects are not equipped to handle. So today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about an unconventional way to grow that actually eliminates all of those negative aspects that architects typically deal with growing, right? Because what's the typical growth model? Let's touch on that, Ryan. Typically, how might a small firm practice, how might growing occur for them? Let's put it that way, in your experience.
So a lot of architecture practices, how in the world how it might occur for them is, like you said, there's an anti-growth sentiment that exists quite prevalent in the architecture industry. If we look at just some figures for a moment, 80% all architects all over the world are in a micro practice. That's crazy. A micro practice is anything under 3 people, really. And there's a big majority of that who are sole practitioners. And like to what you were just saying, the sole practitioner model is very difficult to actually pull off. It's hard. It's a hard life for the majority of people. There's often something that is missing, and normally it's money. And then when there's no money, then being able to do any of the fulfilling work becomes diminished as well. And effectively you own a job. And so you have all of the administrative burden that comes with owning a job, handling all of that kind of stuff. You're responsible as well for finding work. And if you don't have a kind of nice pipeline of stuff coming in all the time, can be a very challenging lifestyle. But it's romantic. The first image that we were describing, oh, well, that sounds great. That sounds like a really nice lifestyle. It's just very, very difficult to pull that off. I often use the example of Glenn Murcott as being a good example of a sole practitioner, but it comes with a certain price. He doesn't have a mobile phone and lives perhaps out in the outback, works completely by himself, no computers, draws by hands. There's a romance to it, but it works for him geographically where he's based, and he's made a very conscious decision to have a lifestyle that is very, a light footprint. And again, there's a romance to that, and perhaps an impracticality to that, depending on where you are in the world. Like, say, if you're somewhere like here in New York, that's going to be a difficult existence.
Well, the other thing I'll say to that, not only in practical, it may be practical, it may not. The other part about that is you need to have a fastidious, like laser-like focus on what you want. Because when you look at what Glenn Murcutt, he's a great example, like you said. I think that's a model where most any small firm practitioners love to have that model. He takes on 3 projects a year at most. He hand selects and picks and chooses the ones he wants to work on. He charges very healthy sums for the work that he does. And he's able to express the kind of architecture and design ethos and principles that he wants as an architect. Now, how did he get there, right? Well, he got there through a lot of sacrifice and determining, saying no to a lot of things. And that's the hard part, right? So you need to say no to a lot. And the number of people that have the wherewithal or the constitution to be able to do that year after year after year, maybe when things aren't working out, it can be very difficult.
Yeah.
And at the same time, even though it can be difficult, it can be rewarding. So that's actually a trap that firm owners can get into, where they take on what we've seen, and I've even done this a little bit in my own life. We can take on a martyr complex, which means that there's a certain amount of joy, happiness, or fulfillment. Let's put it fulfillment. There's a certain amount of fulfillment that we actually get from being a martyr. In other words, if I'm doing that, if I'm sacrificing, saying no to projects, saying yes to only the select ones that I want, maybe not charging a lot of money, scraping by, making ends meet, and just putting my heart and soul into this, hustling and grinding, and I have this like burning fire inside of me of passion for the vision that I want to create. Well, that can feel very rewarding because we can feel the sacrifice we're making, and there's a lot of personal satisfaction that we get from knowing that we're doing something that matters, and it's really hard to do. So that can be a trap because we can go on like that. Firm owners can be on that for years and years and years. As a matter of fact, Frank and Megan Lynn that we just had on our podcast recently, Ryan and I, we were both there a couple months ago in Austin, and they took us to see a beautiful house that they designed. And it was really touching about their stories. They mentioned that for the first 5 or 6 years that they were in that mode. They weren't taking home barely any money for themselves. They were paying them their team members first. Any profits they made in the business, they would reinvest that back into the business. This impacted their ability to pay for some of the, for instance, schooling for their children. It impacted their ability to take vacations. It impacted their financial ability to even do things like buy new cars, right? Because we're putting so much effort back into the business, and it paid off for them. But ultimately, they got to a point where they thought, wow, we've been doing this for a while. How much longer do we need to be in this martyrdom mode where we're sacrificing almost everything? And I think for them, one of the biggest things that they felt they weren't wanting to sacrifice, and usually this is what it comes down to, especially if you have, well, only if you have kids, is your time with your kids. Because when you realize that putting all this effort into the business is actually taking you away from time with your kids, from these special moments when your kids are young, being able to spend time with them, nurture them, help them become well-adjusted young people, suddenly realize, okay, I'm willing to pay a lot, but what I'm not willing to pay is the mental well-being of my children and the connection that I could have with my children. Now, if you don't have children as an architect, then that's not an issue. But if you do have children, that is going to be a major issue. But either way you look at it, there's a certain element of satisfaction that we get from having worked really, really hard to achieve something. The question is, are you ready to graduate from the hustle and grind? And that's the point that Frank and Megan got to, is they said, wow, we could keep on doing this for the next 30 years, because let's face it, there's a lot of architects who live and practice that way for their entire career. It's almost like if you look at architecture school, it's almost like they're in architecture school and they never graduate. Right? If we look at architecture school as a certain time period when
arrested development,
they're stuck in a developmental phase, right? Because yes, when you grow a practice, especially if you're growing a practice from scratch, there is a certain amount of hustle and grind. You're going to have to stay up late some nights. You're going to have to make sacrifices. You're going to have to forego a paycheck or maybe a larger paycheck to put money back into the business to be able to help it grow, to be able to reinvest back into it. And having said that, that stage shouldn't last more than, if you're past 3 years and you're still in that stage, you are stuck in arrested development. It's time to graduate and to reach the next phase of growth as a practitioner.
I think even just saying that like outlining that there's a timeline for that kind of phase, that startup phase of a firm, and that there's something else beyond it. I hope that people listening to that podcast will have a sense of relief, or at the very least, it acts as a marker of, okay, now I know that something should change.
Yeah, and if you listen to many past episodes, really, I mean, 3 years is a stretch. Like realistically, you could be past that phase in 6 months if you already have a good backlog of projects and a lucrative niche that you're focused on. If you're not, I mean, like if you're past that phase, if you're 18 months and you're still in that phase, 2 years and you're still in that phase, then yes, you're lacking something. You're lacking a knowledge, you're lacking a skill set, you're lacking a discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the sad parts is you're unlikely to gain that skill set or that discipline just by doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Which is why so many architects stay in that stage for years and years and years and years, because they don't realize that simply what they're missing is a tool set, a set of disciplines, a set of pieces of knowledge that they could have.
The scary thing as well is that the longer that you're in that stage, the less likely it's going to be that you're going to get out of it.
Yeah, well,
it's going to become harder and harder and harder. Yeah.
You know, I think it was a big aha for me when I understood. I think Charles Darwin said that the brilliance of the human species or evolution isn't that, that we're so smart at things, it's that we're so adaptable, right? So it's not necessarily the survival of the fittest, as Charles Darwin said, it's survival of the most adaptable. And going back to that, as human beings, we're adaptable, meaning we can get used to running our practice, putting money back into the practice. It just becomes the normal. And when something becomes normal, then it becomes numb.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where we get stuck in the trap.
Well, the other way of looking at that phrase, the survival of the fittest, as fittest means who can fit in.
I love that.
With the environment the best, right?
Yeah,
so
that's great.
That idea of that we end up adapting and normalizing this kind of hustle and grind culture. And then in architecture, we have the hindrance sometimes benefit of it being a profession where we're always looking to what are other architects doing so I can make sure that I'm doing the right thing, that we get into a habit of meeting up with lots of other practice owners and everybody's doing the same thing, and then we all mentor each other and say, well, that's what it's supposed to be like. That's just architecture.
Well, that's
how it goes.
It's sort of like confirmation bias.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Which is when I believe something to be true and then the outside world reflects it back to me to be true. And, I go to the AI mixers or I talk to other architects and they're experiencing the same thing. It's like, okay, wow, all possibility disappears. All possibility of something different completely goes away because now we are face to face with our own personal 4-minute mile. Right? Those of you who are listening, you may remember Roger Bannister. For years, for centuries, people had wanted to run faster than the 4-minute mile. They wanted to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. And literally, they had gotten to the point where they thought it was humanly impossible. It's just not physically possible. The human body cannot run faster than 4 minutes in a mile. And then along comes...
a biological impossibility.
Then along comes Roger Bannister, breaks the 4-minute mile, and then literally within months, other people are breaking the 4-minute mile. And then now we have people that are, just insanely fast, much sub 4 minute, right? And so what is that? When we take that back to architectural practice, one of the things to be wary of is, have you accepted the status quo? Have you accepted the existing paradigm of what it's like to run an architectural practice, or are you standing in possibility? Let's address some of these problems, because when we talk about growth, why would we want to grow? Let's just suppose that when we don't grow, we suffer certain problems, and some of these problems would be things like inconsistent pipeline.
Yep.
So the problem of either having cash flow that isn't strong enough, having projects where sometimes we have dry spells in terms of work. Other times we have way too many projects to take on, and then we're juggling things, and then we're worried about telling clients no, because if we tell them no, that could impact our ability to get projects in the future. So it puts us into a place of scarcity. Difficulty hiring.
Yep.
Challenge is number one. I don't have the money to pay team members. I don't know where to find qualified architectural staff. I don't know actually who would be the right hire for me. I'm worried about taking on a team member and having to lay them off in the future. We don't have the cash flow to really support the next employee, although we might need them right now.
Yeah, the fear of getting it wrong.
Fear of hiring the wrong person, having to let someone know. Lack of stability and security with a small architectural practice, so that can be a huge thing. Goes back to inconsistent cash flow, is this idea of lack of stability and security. Because when we're dealing with cash flow shortages, not enough money in the practice, perhaps times of having way too much work and other times of having not enough, this is very challenging to the human nervous system. In other words, this is what causes stress. It's what causes us to wake up at 3 a.m. because we have project deadlines and things we need to work on. It's what causes us to instantly check our phone when we get up in the morning to see who's texted us. It's what causes us to have a little shot of cortisol in our body whenever our phone dings because we're worried about something gone awry on a project. And the impact of living with that stress in our body, of being worried about checking our email because we're going to face an email from an unhappy client or something's going wrong on a project, has major impacts on our joints. It has impacts on our organs. It can cause things like autoimmune diseases, high blood pressure, even cancer. All these things can be impacts from the modern life we live of being so stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
And as a firm owner, let's face it, you're going to have more stress in your life because when the 5 o'clock little hand on the clock ticks over to 5 and then goes to 5:01, it's not like you're an employee and you're just going to, pack up your bag
and head off. You got to go to bed with it.
Head out, and you're just going to forget about work and maybe not even think about it. You're going to carry that home. You're going to be thinking about all the projects. You're going to be thinking about the lack of projects that you have coming up. You're going to be thinking about that proposal that's out there that person hasn't gotten back to you and it's stressing you out because you were counting on that project. You're going to be thinking about that project maybe last year that got canceled and put you in a huge bind and worried that might happen again and how might you prevent that from happening in the future. And all these mental thoughts are causing elevated levels of stress in the body, which means that you're basically walking around with, you're awaiting health disaster waiting to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah. And sadly, we've seen that happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon. We've had number of clients. They come to us, and in our intake when we begin looking at, and this is a plea almost from us. If you run a small architectural practice, please don't wait until you're forced to get help because you have high blood pressure or because you have AFib or something of the sort, which again is very, very common that we have. So those are some of the problems that you can experience as a small practice. And there's a lot of solutions for them. One of the solutions that we're going to talk about is actually growth. So let's look at the possibility, right?
Well, there was another problem to highlight here as well, which is slightly different.
Ah, it's a good one. Go.
Which is to do with the firm owner who is just impatient and they want to grow. And they actually have a vision for a big firm. They've got a vision for doing grandiose architectural work. They've got an idea of having a team. They understand that actually having a team is going to be massively beneficial. And perhaps they don't have the anxieties of, anti-growth culture, if you like. And they're a good people person. They're a good communicator. And for them to be able to relinquish some of these other lower level tasks and administrative tasks and and they're ready and they're willing and they're wanting to design great architecture through the hands of other people, but they're frustrated and impatient at the fact that it's taking so long and that the whole architecture industry has a kind of resonant refrain of, incremental growth, go slowly, you don't want to be doing things too quickly, be responsible. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of wisdom in some of that, but it's also can be very frustrating for those people who do want to grow quickly and they want to get to that vision. And the only thing that they can see it being possible is, well, I've got to be this sole practitioner now for how many years, and maybe 4 or 5, just getting out of that hustle and grind culture and then slowly bringing people on. And then, as a sole practitioner, you are literally wearing so many hats, you're spread thin. And if you've got that big vision, it can be incredibly frustrating because you want to go off and sell and win more projects. But then you've also got to go and deliver stuff. And then you haven't got enough time to do the hiring process properly in the first place. And you haven't got time to go and do the research. So you're always just bouncing around even though you've got this big vision, and now your frustration is compounded, and there's an enormous amount of impatience.
Yes.
I quite like those people though. The impatient ones. We'll find out why.
Yeah, it's definitely both of us are wired more that way, right? Which is like, I would say more entrepreneurial drive. We look at the game of growth as being something that's fun and enjoyable.
Yeah.
So let's paint the picture of what it might look like. We kind of painted the picture at the beginning of what it might look like to be a sole practitioner and have that. There is a gap. So let me go back a second. This may sound like a tangent, but I'll bring it home. So when I was a kid, I used to love reading the Wizard of Oz books. Many people don't know that, yes, the Wizard of Oz was Frank L. Baum's first book, but he had this whole series of books about Oz. And one of the things about Oz is it was this country that was surrounded by a desert on all sides, right? And that's why this mythical land was never discovered, because it was sort of hidden, okay? So whenever Dorothy or whoever was going to visit Oz, they had to cross this deadly desert that if you touched it, you would turn to sand. So it's kind of this idea of going from where you're at to going to some promised land, because Oz is a cool place, right? It's like, there's like the Emerald City, and there's golden bricks on the ground and everything. There's munchkins. I mean, who doesn't like munchkins? Glinda the Good. Speaking of that, my family just saw Wicked. Have you seen that, Ryan? Have you seen the movie?
I know of it.
Man, we should go see a Broadway show while I'm here or something.
I'm game.
Should go see Wicked, or we'll pick one. I hadn't even thought about that.
I'm game for that.
But the point here is that in architectural practice, there's something similar. There's a desert. Consider that there's a desert that you need to cross to get to where you want to go to. And typically that desert is going to be the 5 to 20 staff person gap. So as an architecture of a small practice, if you have about 5 people, that's going to be manageable for you. And if you have a partner, 1 to 2 partners in a practice of that size, you'll be able to manage it. It's very difficult to grow from that to about the 20-person mark, right? Going to 12, 13, 14, 15, 20, that can be very, very challenging, because depending on how you charted that, depending on how you went through that, you may not have the middle management or the people that you can delegate to. Because even in military terms, like when they arrange SEAL teams and special forces, typically they're not going to have more than 8 people on a team, because that's the maximum number of people that you want to have reporting to you. And this, even I remember as I was growing in my architectural practices where I worked, once I had more than 4 or 5 people reporting to me, it was game over. I was just constantly checking up on them, doing red lines, answering, and it became a full-time job just to manage those 4 to 5 people. So this is why many practices, they get stuck. And I want to say stuck, it's not necessarily stuck, but they find a plateau at that stage, or they find it very difficult to get past a 6, 7, and 8. And so when you're in that perspective of having lived that, it's very easy to assume the problem is more people. The problem is that I have more people to manage, as opposed to understanding that the real problem here is lack of systems. The real problem is unclear job roles. The real problem is your lack of leadership training as an architectural practice owner. So what we're going to talk about when we talk about this unconventional way to growth is we want to paint the picture for, let's just pretend like you did have those skills and you did have a 20, 30-person firm practice, or maybe just 25. That's a very nice mid-sized practice doing very good work and be very, very lucrative for you and your team. And here's what can start to happen with a firm of that size, okay? You can have a lot more flexibility to be able to take time away from the office. As a matter of fact, you could even have that office practically run itself, meaning that it allows you to be the creative director. So that dream of you wanting to do the architecture all the time, be the architect, and focus exclusively on that, that is a dream that could actually happen. Not only that, but with the firm that size, you have the ability and the resources to go after projects that are more challenging, that are more lucrative, that are more enjoyable. And with a team of that size, you also have the ability to have a certain esprit de corps, or a certain camaraderie on the team that can be very fun and very fulfilling. Now, on the flip side, yes, it is possible to have a 25-person firm and be completely up to your ears in toxic work culture, in employees that aren't engaged, and just have all the headache and nightmare of that, right? So that is definitely a possibility. What we want to paint, what we're talking about here, is a different possibility where you do have the ability to be the creative director. You do have the ability to build really substantial wealth, not just for yourself in some extractive or exploitive way, but actually for your team members,
Mm-hmm.
to have a very highly paid team, to be able to do things like go on team retreats and have good, awesome opportunities to help them grow as leaders and as people. And at the same time, do fun and enjoyable work, be really well trusted by clients, have them see you as an advisor, a trusted team member almost that they want to do work with. And the benefits on that on you as a firm owner would be like, let's just give a couple real life examples. So Ramiro Torres, after implementing smart practice now, he takes his kids to school every morning, which I know as a father is a real gift to be able to do that. He's able to check in with them. He takes the weekends off to do Cub Scouts and sports activities with them. He goes into the office around 10 a.m. in the
Mm-hmm.
morning because he likes to take a 4-mile loop around this park that he goes to where he can walk, he can journal, so he gets in his exercise. He's lost 30 pounds. He's looking fitter than ever. He feels more energetic. He radiates more energy because of that physical fitness that he has. His team members are very engaged and passionate about the firm. So another huge thing that's been impactful for Ramiro is that he's not the only one carrying the load of moving the mission forward. Because there's an energetic load when you're the leader and you're really, at the end of the day, the only one who really cares about the practice, right? Let's face it, most employees, they care to a certain degree, but if they're not getting paid, they're moving on. And they're not going to give it a second thought other than, hey, that was kind of cool working at that firm for a little bit.
And this also kind of starts to lean into that people in a high-performing team can be multipliers, not just additions.
I love that. Talk about that.
And what I mean by that is, you can have a kind of, if we think about addition, 1 + 1 is 2, + 1 is 3, + 1 is 4, versus multipliers, which is much more logarithmic because we can be doubling, multipliers of 3, multipliers of 4. That when we're in a high-performance team culture, that adding one high-performing person to an already high-performing team suddenly unlocks everybody else's ability by a factorial, not just an addition of just having one person on, which is when your ideas suddenly start taking a life of their own, and you turn around for a moment and then you turn back and 2 team members have created something amazing, or you're now learning from them, they're teaching you, or ideas are being generated at a rate that was unprecedented previously, or people are able to step into new identities and leadership, and the whole thing just has a life of its own. It's really magical and inspiring. So that kind of what you're describing there with Ramiro is he's able now to step back and things are happening without him, and he can now become even more masterful in a particular domain. And his ability to become masterful in this maybe more narrowed focus is allowing other people to become more masterful, and it all operates very well as a team. So we look at the idea of it becoming a multiplier as opposed to just adding people.
Yes.
And that's the thing, really we want to kind of advocate for here is that well-run, powerful teams, what you can start to get accomplished is extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really extraordinary. And it's really, I think, a responsibility of the growing up and the maturing of an architect, or the evolving of an architect. I was watching Bjarke Ingels the other day, and he kind of recounted how he came to architecture because he was interested in art and drawing, and he used to like to paint with, acrylics and oils and whatever. And then he got to architecture school, and they taught him how to draw technical drawings with a pen and a ruler. And he said in that process, he lost some of the fun and playfulness and experimentation that came with the oils and the acrylics, but he learned how to draw things with precision and start to create spaces that could communicate things and to start to conceive of complex 3-dimensional ideas. There was he lost something, but he gained something more. And then he learned how to use the computer. And using the computer, he lost some of the tactility that came with using pencils and pens of drawing and perhaps conceiving something in front of you. But with the computer, he learned how to visualize three-dimensional spaces like never before, and he could invite people into those environments and control lighting and produce realistic renders, and was able to communicate the idea of a space much more rapidly, though there was a little bit of a loss in terms of the tactility. And that was all fine. That's a kind of, interesting architectural evolution that we can all relate to. Then he said, now I work with 700 people in a business, and whilst I've lost the ability, I'm no longer clicking a mouse, I'm no longer involved in the design, my role is one of prompting. So I prompt other people, and I have like little half prompts, and I prompt them into doing something, and then they give me feedback, and we go back and forth in this kind of prompting type scenario. And now I'm designing through other human beings, through a team, and things that are happening are beyond my wildest imagination. And I'm just here kind of just prompting pieces and letting it happen. And I thought that's a really nice way of describing what we're advocating for, which is the evolution and the maturity of an architect, where, there's a little bit of a loss that happens as we kind of let go of the tools and the way that we've always done stuff. But growing people and teams and learning how to execute ideas and do things through other people, kind of facilitate fantastic design through the hands of other people. Great. That is an important part of our evolution. And it is where we get into the world of being the multiplier.
What I love about that is this idea of being able to create something much more powerful or impactful with more people that would not emerge with a smaller team. So possibilities. And I found this with a number of friends that I have, where in conversations that we have about life, relationships, about our own personal growth, spirituality, as I begin to talk and share ideas with other people, I grow and they grow. So it's almost like in this exchange back and forth of two people exchanging ideas, that the overall ideas grow as a result. So I actually grow much more as a person when I'm in relationship with other people than if I was in isolation by myself. And this is one thing that we can really lose out on if we're a sole practicing architect or we have a small team. So the possibility here again is not just more freedom for you, not just more freedom as a creative director, but also potentialities that might not otherwise exist if you had the ability to have a larger team. Things like that.
Yeah.
Right? So let's talk about a shortcut, or let's talk about how the typical to cross that desert, so to speak, of getting to, let's call it a firm with more team members, or let's not even look at it in terms of more team members. Let's look at it in terms of that creative freedom. Let's look at it in terms of that financial reward that we talk about that's possible for every firm owner. Typically, that process, if you try to create that from scratch, may take 10, 20 years to really get to that point. If you look like a lot of firms that have achieved that, it's very rare for a firm to achieve that in less than 10 years. At 10 years, if you're looking at bringing on one team member per year, 10 years in, you're at 10 to 12 team members maximum, right? And then you're in that difficult spot. You're in that desert where you feel like you're doing a whole lot of work managing people.
But it's been hard every year.
Absolutely.
As well.
Been struggling. So what if there were a way to be able to shrink that 10 to 20 year gap down into 2 years?
You mean like an almost near instant?
Instant. Just add water.
Instant growth.
Just add water.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Popcorn.
Yeah. Popcorn. Yeah. So this is where we talk about a nonlinear strategy. This is where we talk about thinking smarter, not harder. And it circles back to our conversation we had with her.
Yeah.
Right. And the idea that one of the quickest ways for you as a firm owner to gain more stability, to gain better projects, to actually even gain a network, because one of the hardest parts about building a practice is that your network is limited. And this is why it takes years and years and years and years for you to start to get that consistent project flow, is because you are in the process of building those relationships, and it takes time.
Yeah. And it takes time, and you might not even been doing it that well.
Well, probably not. Yeah.
Right. And so it takes ages. It's been done poorly. And actually the possibility of there being a way of acquiring an instant network that has good relationships, that's been well nurtured, and done well, that becomes quite exciting.
Absolutely. So there's an opportunity right now in the architecture industry that is absolutely huge. And it goes back to a larger cultural trend, which is the baby boomers who are now retiring, who are looking to transfer a lot of wealth and assets to the younger generation. And so in architecture, what that looks like is we have, I don't know how many, but hundreds of architectural practices where the owners would like to pass them on to someone else. They want to sell their firms. They want to cash in after all their hard work, and they don't know how to do that. And so this provides an enormous opportunity for you if you're an architecture firm owner right now running a small practice and you're tired of the hustle and grind and you like to literally within a couple months have a team that can support you, get larger projects, and basically have an instant architectural practice.
This is the quantum leap.
This is a quantum leap. Yeah.
This is rather than
quantum leap strategy.
That kind of linear incremental growth. This is a way of, it's the ready-made architecture practice. We see it. It's very interesting. We've spoken to a lot of larger practice owners and, sometimes they haven't identified somebody who's ready for leadership. Sometimes that's missing. Often the people who should be in those leadership positions have gone off and set up their own business. And, they were either in a business prior that didn't give them any leadership opportunities, or they felt like their growth was capped, or they felt like they couldn't progress. And I find it such an interesting mismatch where you've got practice owner over here, they don't have the leadership underneath to take over the firm. They're wondering what to do with the next part of their organization. Then you've got business owners over here, sole practitioners. If they've got ambition, or they've kind of been able to understand the importance of growth and that actually they could grow instantaneously as opposed to this incremental growth idea. Okay, great. There's a synergy there that is starting to open up and is great. Really, really good way of rapidly growing and achieving architectural competence, if you like.
Yeah. And so this is an excellent opportunity for small practice owners right now, which is to acquire some of these outgoing firms. That firm owners, many of these firms, the firm owners they'll just throw away the keys. They'll just shut down the office, they'll throw away the keys, and they'll just keep on, they'll just sail off to the Bahamas or something, right? Now, there could be a number of things which can keep a firm owner, let's say you as a listener, this may sound scary and intimidating. There may be a number of reasons why you wouldn't want to acquire another firm. So let's address those because we feel that often those fears are unfounded. And I'll start out with the story of back when I used to live in Houston, my wife and I, our early years of our marriage, we lived on a sailboat. So we lived on a sailboat and we got to a point where we were living on this 28-foot Pearson. For those of you who are sailors, you may know those boats. And we were looking to upgrade to a larger boat. And at the time, I had a good buddy of mine through church. His name was Mattia DeRico, who was an Olympic champion sailor, but he was a yacht broker. So he sold yachts. And so we went over to his yacht brokerage and he was showing us these different boats. And I remember he took us out in this beautiful 41-foot sailboat. And it was just like going from a 28-foot boat to a 41-foot boat is like you're tripling. It's like you're tripling because there's actually
so much more
there's
space
a shower
and
inside.
You can walk around and move.
There's more berths. There's more places to sleep. There's more headroom. You can have more cooking space. It's just like everything grows exponentially. And so it was very appealing because I'm like, wow, this is like moving on to a little mini floating mansion. This is pretty nice. But oddly and funny enough at the time, I wasn't a very experienced sailor. And what kept me, one of the things that kept me from wanting to purchase a larger boat like that was that, and I'm embarrassed now that I even said this, but was that if I was coming in too quickly to the dock, I wouldn't be able to put my hand out and slow the boat down. Because with my small sailboat, I could do that. I just had an outboard motor, and if the boat was coming a little fast, it wasn't too hard to like jump off onto the dock and like slow the boat down so you didn't smash on the dock. That's, for those of you who sail, that's usually one of the most dangerous parts of sailing is getting in and out of the dock. because sailboats are very different from cars.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot of momentum, there's wind, they drift, there's prop walk. You know, prop walk is when, because the propeller goes in one direction,
Mm-hmm.
it will actually pull the boat sideways in that direction if you don't have forward momentum. So it gets very tricky at times if you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
And when I told that to Mattia, he sort of laughed and he said, well, you would never do that with a large sailboat. That's why you learn how to sail the sailboat. And since that time we did upgrade, we got a beautiful 40-foot boat. And he was exactly right? Is that I was able to put that thing in and stop on a dime because I knew how to manage that boat.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to an architectural practice, one of the things that can keep us from maybe acquiring a firm or wanting to grow is like, well, I'm having difficulty with, all the emails I'm getting right now. Heck, I have no bandwidth, no ability to do a larger practice, but that's based upon the false assumption that you run a larger practice the same way you run a smaller practice.
Yeah.
Just like going back to my sailboat experience, right? The mistake would be thinking that I'm going to treat a large 40-foot sailboat with these massive sails and this gigantic mast the same way I would my little sailboat that I could basically take the mast down by my hand.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a whole different opportunity. With the larger sailboat, there's electric windlass. You have all sorts of machines that help you out. You have a much larger engine. You may even have little motors that help you position the boat left to right. So it's a completely different story. So let's dismantle that one for starters, right? Like there's a lot of those size practices that work very well. And so just because a practice is larger doesn't mean you're going to work harder.
Yeah. That's a very interesting point of like how we unconsciously use our past experience as a way of projecting forward into the future. And so we kind of make the unlogical but logical assumption that because I've got problems with these 4 people that I'm managing right now, that having 20 of them is going to be magnifying it by that factorial of 5. And it's not right. It's not what we're talking about. And so there's often the fear of not knowing how to manage something larger that ends up getting into the way of people doing this. And again, there's confirmation bias in this where people they'll argue for the status quo. We've had this conversation before on the show where we've seen architecture practice owners, they'll argue for the status quo. They'll argue and defend being small because not willing to admit that there's either knowledge gaps or there's a lot of fear involved and that they're doing even the small business poorly.
Yeah. One example on that would be, I know that a lot of fears about growing would be feeding the whole so-called feeding the beast thing. In other words, heck, if I have 20 team members or 25 team members, oh my God, like we're talking multi-million-dollar practice of multi-million dollars of payroll every single year to be able to support
It's so
this
stressful
practice.
just feeding 3 of them.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so like, man, if I'm struggling to provide for 3, how the heck am I going to provide for 25? What we don't realize, and here's the key, that oftentimes in an acquisition kind of scenario, it is actually easier to provide for 25 people than it is to provide for 3 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the mind twist that we oftentimes don't realize, which is why this is such an enormous opportunity for architects who can capture this vision.
It's a little bit like raising money when we often hear stories of raising equity for startup businesses, and people will often start with a round, friends and family round of 100 grand or something like that. And raising 100 grand can be really hard, like an enormous amount of energy that's involved in doing it. And, even though there are people who might have 100 grand to easily give to you, your small venture and the small vision that it might have is not attractive. And that actually the same amount of energy can be used to raise something more like $10 million, because it's easier to find private equity and people who are wanting to invest that kind of scale. But the vision of it is kind of unimaginable. Hence, we'll do something much harder for a much smaller amount. And so there's this, it's not about hard work. If we think about the people that work the hardest in society, a lot of the cleaners and workers and people like that, as hard work. That's proper hard work. It doesn't pay that well. So it's not about a question of putting in more hard work. The position of where we're the context of what we're directing it to makes an enormous difference of what we want to get out. So just because it's hard work with 3 people, it's a false equation to assume that that's the way it's always going to be.
Well, that is an important fallacy, huge logical fallacy to recognize in business, that if I work harder, I'll be successful.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, this myth has gotten a hold of our minds and we believe it, and it sounds very noble, and it's confirmed and it's accentuated by a lot of the social media personalities. Again, I mentioned David Goggins, all the business kind of thought leaders are out there. They're telling you, work hard, work hard, work hard. Yes, you must work hard. And yet the working hard is not the key critical piece in success, unfortunately. And so when we think that it is, we find ourselves in a trap. The second thing that might keep firm owners from actually investing in another architectural practice or buying a practice, and it's not just architecture, actually acquiring an engineering practice could be an amazing move, would be, I don't have the funds to pay for it. And again, this is the result of limited myopic thinking when we think that I don't have the ability to pay for it, because when you look at how big business acquisitions happen, if you're buying a practice, you're not buying that practice with your own money. It's not like you're taking out a mortgage. It's not like you're dipping your bank account and writing a huge check to buy a practice. As a matter of fact, many businesses are bought with zero money down. And we look at how this is what happens in the business world. And we look at businesses like Facebook, businesses like Google. They're always acquiring other businesses. And yes, those businesses, they will pay a lot of money to acquire businesses. But in the small business world, the business itself is what will pay back and pay for itself, which is pretty cool.
You're buying a cash machine.
You're literally buying a cash machine that can just spit out cash, assuming that you do your due diligence and the practice you're investing in has a pipeline. It is a good acquisition. Literally, you're buying a cash machine. You're buying an instant team. You're buying an instant network of relationships.
You're buying access into new sectors, new geography. You're buying tools, equipment. You're buying reputation.
Yep. And the other thing here that might be holding people back from wanting to go down this route or even think about it would be the fear of failure. Man, if I buy that practice, I could fail. And then if I fail, that's huge. The fact of the matter is, if you do your due diligence, a practice that's worth purchasing has a lot of stability. It's not going to fail.
And you can look at the likelihood, and you can be much more analytical about it.
Yep.
And there's evidence.
Yeah. And I mean, when I say it's not going to fail, that means if you've done your due diligence. So it's in a good niche. It's in a niche that is probably more stable. So some are very stable and others are less so. Residential, very unstable. Multifamily, hit or miss, right? Not the most stable industry. Healthcare, very stable with a very good future. K through 12 schools, very stable, the good future. Higher education, very stable, good future. Civic projects, again, that one could be a little bit more up and down because of the economy and the way that politics works, but they're very lucrative. Anything that's related to the more civil engineering side of things. So this may be very unsavory for an architect to want to get involved in that, but things like public works can be very lucrative and ultra stable. So, if you begin to think more creatively about how you can get your end result, let's say that I'm an architect and I want to have that dream life where I do really fun and exciting projects, where I'm bringing my best creative gifts to the world. It may make sense to have some sort of stable base on which to be able to do that kind of work. And let's just say that you acquired a civil engineering firm. Let's say you acquired a soils engineering firm. Like, you wouldn't even necessarily need to be directly involved in that practice, but they're highly stable. They can practically run by themselves if they have the team in place. And then it gives you the stability to then be able to create and have the vision that we talked about earlier. So what we're really talking about here is getting outside the paradigms of working and hustling and grinding for 10, 15, or 20 years, only to build a practice that frankly isn't worth that much, and that eventually you need to close the doors.
I mean, it's a similar sort of thing, the obstacles that people will immediately kind of put in front of themselves. One is like, I don't have the money. And it's the same sort of thing in property development. We hear so many architects want to be able to get into property development, but don't because, I don't have any cash to put forward. Buying a business is even easier because as you're saying, it can be less cash intensive, and you can, if you needed to borrow, you can borrow against the business that you're looking at buying, rather than you and your own personal ability to be able to pay back a loan, which just opens up a whole world of possibility and freedom. And then it flips it on its head as well, because the old model of thinking about how businesses get acquired is usually, we're always thinking, oh, it's got to be a bigger business acquiring a smaller business. And here what we're kind of asserting is that it's possible for it to be the other way around. You as a small business owner growing your business by buying something bigger. And again, we often just don't think that you're allowed to do it. And it's not the case at all. And you would think, oh, in order to be able to do that, then I've got to have loads of money to be able to throw into the purchase price of it. Again, that's not the case. You could be buying a business here using future profits that business is going to earn, and you could be utilizing the reserves and revenue. You can make good, informed, intelligent decisions about the performance of that business and what it should be and could be doing. And if you're being really smart, you're starting to see, well, what are my assets and skill sets for me to improve that business and to mix it with my existing company and take it even further.
Yeah, I mean, this is an excellent opportunity for a one or two person, like let's say there's two leaders, let's say there's two partners and you have 2 or 3 team members. This is an excellent way for you to grow from hustling, grinding, inconsistent cash flow to actually being able to breathe for once, being able to think at a higher level, being able to be strategic, being able to just step into that literally in a matter of a year. You could complete this entire process and be from struggling, inconsistent cash flow, limited network to suddenly being flush with cash, suddenly having very interesting projects that are a lot larger that you're working on and connections in that particular niche.
And I put this out to a call for people who are in existing firms as well, like younger team members who are either waiting in line to become partner or something, that there's more assertive ways of going about this. And we've got a practice at the moment who the owner went outside of their firm to go and find a new person to be the next in line, the number 2, to prepare them for partnership. And it was quite interesting that they did that, and there wasn't anybody inside of the team. And it kind of suggests as well that there are these, they're brilliant young entrepreneurial architectural leaders that with the right amount of creative thinking and just being able to have a vision and possibility, well, you might not need to wait for someone to actually come and find you. This could be well within your remit of getting involved and purchasing a firm. Or if you're in an existing firm at the moment, what would happen if you were to think about your financial ability to raise some capital and make an offer to buy into partnership?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's probably, I know we have a lot of listeners who aren't in firm ownership right now. They aspire to own a firm. They're intrigued by the idea of doing the kind of work they want to do, of setting the culture of the firm the way they want to set it, about doing a different paradigm of architectural practice ownership. And I know that can feel very intimidating to start out from scratch. Actually, it's not even a route that I would recommend.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend firm owners going from the traditional route, which is, stopping your employment at a firm and starting from scratch. I would say without a doubt, acquire a firm. Just step into firm ownership immediately. Now, that may need to be paired with some leadership training, coaching and consulting and mentoring, but there are people out there like ourselves who do that. So it's simply a matter of getting some support in the areas in which you might not know what you're doing, you're hesitant. But this is a way to literally shave 20 years off of your professional journey. So it's a huge win for you if you're sitting at a computer right now, you want to start your own firm, and it just seems like you want to get the benefits, but it seems like a long road to get there. This is an amazing opportunity for you. And this opportunity will probably only be around for maybe the next couple years. Probably have like a 3 to 4 year window where this is going to be a really good opportunity. Who knows past then? Maybe it will continue, maybe it won't.
Yeah.
But as these other firm owners are beginning to retire, there's going to be less of these firms for sale.
And what we're starting to see is that either firms go out of existence, or they get acquired by larger, big corporate entities and organizations. And yeah, it's a once in a generational kind of opportunity that we're starting to see, and it's an enormous growth hack that can be really massively profitable and have people's visions come into reality far quicker.
And it's a lot easier than you think,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of these baby boomers, and if you're a baby boomer listening to this, you'll probably chuckle because you know it's true. You're probably not that good with your P&L. You probably don't look at your income statement every single month. There's probably a lot of things you know you're doing in your business that you're not doing that you know you should be doing. So if you're a younger architect, younger professional or designer or engineer, landscape architect, interior designer, and you're listening to this podcast, you probably have a lot of the foundational information to know what you might need to do differently, which means you can come in and by tweaking just a couple small things, it's not unlikely that you could add 50% of value to that company in the first year just based upon doing some fundamental business practices that we talk about here on the podcast. Now that is an amazing opportunity. No, that's a wrap. And today's Smart Practice tool tip, here we go. Drowning in spreadsheets when you should be designing masterpieces. Consider that the average architecture firm owner wastes 20 to 30 hours weekly on admin tasks that could be delegated with the right system. If you ever feel like you're chasing your own tail in your practice, the Delegation Roadmap Smart Practice tool is your escape from what I call admin hell, helping you as a firm owner reclaim your creative energy and passion for architecture. One firm owner used this tool to clear 20 hours of low-value tasks from their weekly schedule. Just imagine what you could do with that time, but you'll only know if you get this tool by going to businessofarchitecture.com/delegate. This tool is completely free. You can get it and access it by going to businessofarchitecture.com/delegate. And now a word from today's sponsor.
BIM can be important for your next project, but it's not the only thing you need for your next project. That's why it's important that 95% of manufacturers who offer free BIM files on ARCAT also offer another type of data your project needs. That means 95% of the products with BIM also have CAD files and are in a specification, in a patented spec wizard, and or have product information to help you make the right selection. So stop going to a site with just BIM and go to arcat.com to get everything you need for your next project for free and without registering. That's ARCAT, ARCAT.com. A while ago, we began to hear reports of a company that was helping some of our clients build remote teams. We looked into it more closely and discovered the company World Teams that was helping small architectural practitioners build remote teams that were both capable and qualified. We were intrigued by another business that are addressing one of the critical pain points for small architectural practices, which is the ability to grow and shrink a team effectively, to be able to handle higher workflow without having to staff up significantly, and also being very sensitive about labor cost. World Teams is built to address these issues. World Teams is a small but mighty company that helps architectural practices build high-performing remote teams quickly and efficiently, saving you the headache of sorting resumes and interviewing underqualified candidates. World Teams operates in your time zone and prioritizes near-native English speakers, ensuring clear and efficient communication with your remote team members. They have flexible contracts so you can adjust your team size as your needs evolve. Additionally, you're connected directly with your skilled professionals, which fosters trust and collaboration, and World Teams helps you reduce your operating cost without compromising the quality that's so important to a practice. To download a free guide for building a remote team for a small architectural practice, go to businessofarchitecture.com/World Teams. That's one word, businessofarchitecture.com/World Teams.
Today's episode of the Business of Architecture show is sponsored by Smart Practice, the world's leading step-by-step solution for practice owners that want to structure their existing practice so the complexity of business doesn't get in the way of the architecture. Because you see, business means way more than issuing invoices and figuring out how to do payroll. Now, here's the truth. You can scroll free tips forever, but the results don't come from theory. They come from advice applied to your specific practice situation. And that's what we provide here at Business of Architecture. And this is where the transition and the transformation actually begins. So If you'd like to graduate from the hustle and grind culture of running a practice and get back to architecture again, you can discover the Smart Practice Method by going to smartpracticemethod.com. Enter your email there and you'll get free access to a video that shows the proven, simple, and easy to implement Smart Practice Method that's revolutionizing firm management for owners and teams. And as always, I want to thank you for joining me here today and remind you that the views expressed on this show by our guests do not represent those of the hosts, and we make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you have more fun and less stress. Carpe diem.